The whole stadium held its breath. The score was 87 minutes when Henry Carter, the team's star, received the ball on the edge of the area. His body moved with the precision of a conductor conducting a symphony, a dribble, a subtle touch, and then he darted into the penalty area, leaving the defenders behind. The goal was just a few steps away. The fans exploded in anticipation. But then it happened. A searing pain tore through his back, as if a red-hot iron had been driven into his spine. His knee gave way, and before he could understand what was happening, Henry fell to the turf. It was not an ordinary fall. His body collapsed uncontrollably, his face contorting in pure agony. The stadium, which seconds before had vibrated with energy, plunged into a sepulchral silence. "Henry!" The captain's voice echoed. The doctors rushed to the field, turned him on his side, and began examining him. The world swirled around him, but all Henry felt was that unbearable pain and paralyzing fear. Something was wrong. Very wrong. He tried to move his legs. Nothing. No sign, no response. The noise around seemed distant. He saw the coach's desperate gaze, the opposing team's players whispering to each other, the crowd holding their breath. Then he heard one of the doctors whisper something on the radio. "Loss of sensation in the lower limbs. We need to remove it now." His heart raced. He didn't want to believe what he had just heard. Loss of sensation? Did that mean? The stretcher arrived. Henry was carefully lifted, the fans cheering in respect. But he didn't hear anything else. His mind was in absolute panic. The only thing I could think was, this can't be happening to me. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and despair. The white walls seemed to suffocate him. He lay there on the stretcher as the doctors and nurses ran back and forth. Tests, exams, questions he didn't want to answer. Then, finally, the chief physician came in. A man with grey hair and a professional expression, but with eyes that carried a weight that Henry recognized immediately. He had seen this look before, the look of someone about to destroy a dream. "Henry," the doctor began, taking a deep breath. "We did all the possible tests. We need to talk about the results." Henry swallowed. Her father, Henry Carter Sr., was standing next door, holding the edge of the bed tightly. "Say it right away." His voice came out hoarse. "What's happening to me?" The doctor hesitated, but then spoke with a calmness that made reality seem even worse. "You suffered a serious neuromuscular injury. We found that there is a rare underlying condition that has been aggravated by physical exertion. The situation, it is irreversible." The world stopped. "What do you mean by irreversible?" Henry's voice trembled. "You've lost the movement of your legs, Henry." Silence. Henry felt as if he had been punched in the chest. His heart raced. His breath became short. No, no, no. This could not be real. He tried to sit up, tried to feel anything below his waist, but nothing, not a tingle, not a shred of control. His father, at his side, put his hand to his mouth, his eyes shining with tears that he tried to hold back. "I'm going to recover. Sure?" Henry's voice was just a whisper. "The physiotherapy, the treatments, something's going to work, isn't it?" The doctor closed his eyes for a moment before answering. "Our focus will be on adapting to the new reality. We will work so that you have quality of life." The rest of the words were lost in a vacuum. Quality of life. A cruel euphemism for forget your old life. Henry Carter, the football prodigy, the man who lived to run, dribble and score goals. Now he was tied to a bed, to a body that no longer responded to him. He didn't notice when his father hugged him. He didn't feel it when the nurses adjusted the sheets over his legs. Everything around him disappeared, and only an overwhelming emptiness remained. His world was over. The days that followed were a blur. Henry couldn't remember how many times doctors and nurses came in and out of the room, trying to explain procedures, routines, medications. Nothing mattered. He just stared at the ceiling, not saying a word. His father came every day. He sat next to the bed, held his hand, tried to talk, but Henry did not answer. I didn't want to hear phrases like, "You still have a life ahead of you," or "You're going to find a new purpose." He already knew the truth. Nothing would ever be the same again. When he was finally discharged, reality hit even harder. The mansion that had once been a symbol of his glory now looked like an empty castle. Photos of his achievements still decorated the walls, trophies shone on the shelves, but all that was nothing more than memories of an unreachable past. Henry spent most of his time in the room, refusing visits, ignoring calls. He stopped eating properly, rejected physical therapy sessions, and refused to even look at the wheelchair next to his bed. His body no longer belonged to him, so why bother? His father, despite his age, stood firm. He didn't say anything, but Henry saw the worry in his eyes, the way he sighed as he left the room, the way he held his phone for long minutes before deciding not to call someone for help. But everything got worse when Henry needed more intimate care. Baths, changes of clothes, even changing diapers. His pride crumbled with every touch of a nurse or caregiver. He hated it. He hated feeling like a burden. It was then that, on a rainy morning, his father entered the room and said, in a calm but firm voice, "I've hired someone to take care of you, Henry." He didn't even look. "I don't need anyone." "You do, yes. And it arrives tomorrow." Henry gritted his teeth, but didn't answer. Deep down, I knew I didn't have the strength to fight against it. The next morning, Henry awoke to the sound of voices in the hallway. He ignored it, as he had with everything lately, and closed his eyes again, hoping that the day would just pass. But then, the bedroom door opened. "Hit it up, Henry." The female voice was soft, but carried an unexpected firmness. Henry opened his eyes, annoyed, and saw a young woman standing there. She wore no lab coat or nursing uniform, just casual, comfortable clothes. Brown hair tied in a ponytail, expressive eyes, and a discreet smile. Not the pious kind, but one who has seen a lot and is not easily frightened. "Who are you?" he grumbled, his voice rough from lack of use. "Lauren Mitchell. Your father hired me to take care of you." "I don't need a babysitter." She arched an eyebrow. "Great, because I'm not a babysitter either." "I am your caregiver. I'll help you with whatever you need, but that doesn't mean you can treat me like I'm not here." Henry let out a short, humorless laugh. "That's what we'll see." He turned to the side, ending the conversation. I expected her to feel uncomfortable, to back off, as so many other people have done in recent months. But Lauren didn't leave. "Very well. Let's get started." Before he could ask, "Start what?" "Zrenia, Lauren odkryla zanawesi, pozwoliła svetu dnia wytorgnucia w temnuju komnatu." Henry groaned in protest. "Close it! Have you been sunbathing lately?" So let's change that." He squinted his eyes, annoyed. "You haven't been here for 5 minutes and you're already bossing me around. Do you prefer someone who just says, 'Yes, sir'? Because if that's the case, your father hired the wrong person." Henry stared at her, surprised. Lauren showed no fear. I didn't feel sorry for him, and that bothered him more than anything. He decided that he would make her life hell. What he didn't know was that Lauren was more than prepared for it. The days passed, and Lauren was still there. No matter how much Henry tried to push her away, she remained steadfast. Unlike all the others who turned away from him, tired of his bitterness, Lauren seemed to see something beyond the thick skin he had created around him. But Henry wasn't ready to give in. "Do you have nothing better to do than stay here wasting your time?" He grumbled one afternoon as she entered the room carrying a towel and a set of clean clothes. Lauren crossed her arms and smiled. "If I left every time you treated me badly, Henry, I would have left here on the first day." He rolled his eyes and turned to the window, pretending he didn't care. But he cared. That same night, as he stared at the ceiling of his room, Henry heard a muffled laugh coming from the living room. The sound took him by surprise. It had been so long since the house had looked like a silent tomb that the laughter seemed to belong to another world. Curious, he forced his body to the side and grabbed the control of the automatic wheelchair next to the bed. He hadn't moved on his own in a long time, but at that moment, something inside him pushed him out. With a hesitant effort, he led the chair into the hallway. Downstairs, in the living room, Lauren was sitting next to her father. They laughed at something he said, sharing a bottle of wine as old friends. Henry felt a tightness in his chest. It wasn't envy. It was nostalgia, missing feeling part of something. Being there, talking, laughing, living. He walked away before anyone noticed his presence. That night, for the first time in months, Henry fell asleep without feeling that crushing weight on his chest. Something inside him was beginning to change, and, against her will, Lauren was at the center of that change. The next morning, Henry woke up with a different feeling. It was not happiness, nor relief. These emotions seemed too distant for him, but there was something less suffocating in the air. When Lauren entered the room, he didn't look away or pretend to sleep like he used to. He just watched her. "Good morning, Henry," she said, placing a breakfast tray on the table next to the bed. He did not immediately respond. Instead, he looked at the food and for the first time felt like eating. "Do you always make a point of serving me?" he mumbled, picking up his fork. Lauren smiled, sitting down on the nearby pole. "Number only when you decide to stop throwing tantrums and accept the food." Henry snorted, but couldn't help but get out of the corner of his mouth and rose into a near smile. It was strange. That woman, who he did everything to push away, was still there, and somehow his presence made the room feel less claustrophobic. They were silent for a while. Only the sound of the fork hitting the plate filled the space, until Lauren broke the stillness. "Can I ask you a question?" Henry looked at her, chewing slowly. "If I say no?" "I'll ask anyway." He rolled his eyes, but gestured for her to continue. "When was the last time you did something that really made you feel alive?" The question caught him off guard. He opened his mouth to answer, but no words came. All he could remember was the field, the packed stadium, the sound of the crowd screaming his name, but that already seemed like another life. Lauren noticed his silence and nodded, as if she already knew the answer. "So, I think it's time to change that. Henry Franziu, each. What do you mean?" She got up, grabbed a sweatshirt from the closet, and threw it over his legs. "Let's go out for a while." He blinked, confused. Where to leave? Out of this room, out of this house, out of your bubble of self-pity. Henry folded his arms. "I'm not going anywhere." Lauren just smiled, leaning closer to him. "Do you want to bet?" Henry looked at Lauren as if she had just said the absurdity of the century. "You can't just show up here and decide I'm going to leave." "Of course I can," she said casually. "And guess what? I've already decided." He let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "I don't feel like leaving." Lauren crossed her arms and arched her eyebrow. "Then tell me, what do you feel like doing?" Henry opened his mouth but closed it soon after. He didn't know how to answer. For months, he wanted nothing more than to be alone, to sink into his own pain. But now, in front of her, the truth hit him. He didn't just want to exist. He wanted to feel something again. But to leave? Being out there in the real world? "I'm not ready for that," he murmured. Lauren knelt before him, keeping her gaze steady and direct. "Henry, if you wait until you're ready, you'll never leave this room." He looked away, uncomfortable. "I don't want people to see me like that." She sighed. "What if I tell you that no one will see you?" Henry looked at her suspiciously. "What are you up to?" Lauren smiled, mysterious. "Just trust me." 20 minutes later, Henry found himself inside a car with Lauren at the wheel. The morning sun filtered through the window, and he felt his heart racing in his chest. It was strange to be outside after so long. "Where are we going?" he asked, still suspicious. "A quiet place," Lauren replied, not taking her eyes off the road. "I promise you'll like it." Henry sighed and looked away. The streets of the city looked different from what he remembered, not because they had changed, but because he had changed. When the car finally stopped, Henry frowned. "The park?" Lauren smiled. "Don't worry, it's almost empty. I thought a little fresh air would do you good." He swallowed. The idea of being there, even without crowds, still made him uneasy. Lauren noticed, and without pressuring him, just said, "Let's go in your time." Henry took a deep breath. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to try. Henry hesitated. The park seemed quiet, with few people scattered on the benches and tree-lined paths. The sound of birds mingled with the faint rustling of leaves, rocked by the gentle morning wind. It was a peaceful setting. But to him, being out there still felt like an affront to what had become his reality. Lauren noticed his hesitation. "Let's do it this way," he said softly. "You just take a deep breath and feel the air. No rush, no obligation." Henry exhaled slowly and looked at her. "You talk like it's that easy." "It's not," Lauren admitted. But every step, no matter how small, is still a step. He was silent for a moment, then turned the controls of his wheelchair, moving a few inches forward. Lauren smiled, but didn't comment. She just walked beside him, respecting his time. They followed in silence for a while, until Lauren stopped next to a wooden bench. "Here it looks like a good place." Henry looked around. The shade of a large tree made the place cool, and from there he had a wide view of the park. Some children were playing at a distance, an elderly couple strolling hand in hand. It was a simple scene, but loaded with something he had forgotten: normality. He looked away from Lauren. "Do you always do that?" She raised an eyebrow. "That's what?" "Pull people out of their darkness without asking permission." Lauren smiled sideways. "Only when it's worth it." Henry felt a tightness in his chest at that answer. For months, he felt invisible, irrelevant. But here she was, saying he was worth it. "What if I don't want to change?" Lauren took a sip from the bottle of water she had brought and replied simply, "Then I'll be here when you want me to." Henry looked away, feeling something inside him break a little more. For the first time, he thought that maybe, just maybe, he didn't want to spend the rest of his life trapped in that cocoon of pain. And, without realizing it, his wall began to crumble. In the following days, something began to change inside Henry. He still struggled with the shadow of depression, but the mere fact, he never imagined making. And Lauren, well, Lauren was still there by his side, with her unwavering patience and her unexpected light. One afternoon, as she adjusted her position in the wheelchair, he watched her intently. For the first time, she not only saw her caregiver, but she saw the woman she was. The way the loose strands of her hair swayed when she focused, how her eyes sparkled when she said something that excited her, and most importantly, how she never showed a trace of pity, only genuine respect. "Have you always been like this?" Henry asked suddenly. Lauren stopped and faced him. "Just how?" "A force of nature." She laughed, surprised. "I don't know. I think I've always enjoyed helping people. But why?" Her smile softened, and for a moment, Henry saw a different shadow in her eyes. "Because one day, I needed someone to do it for me. And I didn't." Henry felt a knot in his chest. For the first time, he realized that maybe Lauren wasn't just a kind woman trying to help him. Perhaps she knew exactly what it was like to be lost in the dark. "You don't have to talk about it," he said, his voice softer than usual. She sighed, shrugging. "Not today, but one day, maybe." They stared at each other in silence, and Henry felt something inside him tighten. He didn't just want to know about her. He wanted to understand her. He wanted to meet her beyond the woman who pushed him out of his comfort zone. And for the first time, he realized the obvious. He was falling in love. The realization hit him like a punch in the stomach. He, Henry Carter, the man who had spent months refusing to feel anything but anger and self-pity, now felt something completely unexpected. Fear. Because falling in love meant opening up, and he didn't know if he was still capable of that. The days became weeks, and Lauren's presence was no longer just an outside force trying to rescue him. Now, Henry longed for his company. His smiles became more frequent, his responses less harsh. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to imagine a future different from the one his tormented mind had built. But the fear was still there. He wanted Lauren, but did he deserve that feeling? Did she deserve to be stuck with someone like him, broken, unable to give him everything she could have given him? One night, while looking at the stars through his bedroom window, he heard a light knock on the door. "Can I come in?" was her voice. He took a deep breath. "You never ask permission." Lauren laughed softly and walked in, closing the door behind her. She walked over and sat down in the armchair next to the bed, where she had so often taken care of him. "You've been thinking a lot lately," she said. Henry ran his hand over his face, sighing. "I'm trying to understand something." "And what is it?" He stared at her, his heart racing. "How did you manage to change everything?" Lauren tilted her head, curious. "Everything. Yes, this house, my father. Even the silence inside feels different." She smiled, but waited. Henry swallowed hard and then said, finally, "And worst of all, you made me want to live again." Lauren's eyes softened. She reached out and held his gently. "That's not bad, Henry. This is wonderful." He hesitated for a moment, but then, with his heart racing, he shook her hand. "What if I'm not enough?" Lauren leaned closer, her gaze full of tenderness and determination. "You already are. those words completely disarmed him. For the first time, Henry felt no fear of what might come. Then slowly, he raised his other hand and touched her face, his fingers gliding gently across her skin. Lauren closed her eyes for a moment, feeling his touch. When she opened it again, she found his eyes shining in a way she had never seen before. And there, that night, without promises or haste, without the need for grandiose words, Henry knew he was ready to love again. The man who thought he had lost everything found, in Lauren's arms, a new beginning. And this time, he chose to live. Life can always surprise us, even in the most difficult moments. Henry thought he had lost everything, but Lauren's love and dedication made him find hope again. What about you? Have you ever lived or know a story of overcoming like this? Share in the comments, leave your like, and subscribe to the channel for more exciting stories. See you next time.